Hi, everybody. If you're watching this, it means we had a snow day and we're not meeting in the physical classroom. So we're going to meet online, and I'm going to try to walk you through the importance of having a working thesis, how to incorporate secondary sources into your paper, and probably most importantly for today, how to paraphrase and then put together an annotated bibliography. So lots to do. So let's get started. So I just want to say a little bit about, right, why is having a working thesis important? And working thesis meaning, right, that yes, completely understanding that our thesis is subject to change at any point in the research project or at any point during the draft stage. And you have to allow this to happen. It could end up hurting you in the end if you just are like so, right, set on keeping the working thesis, because the truth is that scholars expect that their ideas are going to evolve and change the more they read and the more that they research. So it's cool. I want it to change. I expect that it will. But just so that we can sort of see what this looks like, I've developed a research question and a working thesis with which I'm just going to build today's lesson off of. And hopefully, right, you can then transfer the skills into your own work and be better set going into the Thanksgiving break. So just real briefly, if you haven't gotten a working thesis yet, get one ASAP, right? Super important. And so my research question, right, is that I was interested in understanding how a working woman's happiness is affected or can be affected by her workplace policies, right? So her employer's policies regarding work and family, right? Is there any leniency there, or how is happiness correlated with a workplace environment? Or, right, how is it complicated? So, from that research question, I then developed a working thesis that I would look at two sources, which are both in the closed research folder on Sakai. The first one is The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, and the second one is Sarah Ahmed's The Happiness Turn, which if we do a little digging, we can read the article on the new gender gap by Stevenson and Wolfer, and they really, really heavily rely on Sarah's piece, The Happiness Turn. So I'm going to be weaving that in as well. All right, back to the working thesis. I'm just going to read it out loud, and then we'll sort of dissect it from there and put it in conversation with a paragraph structure or an outline, a working outline for the paper itself. So the working thesis is, although women's workplace happiness has increased in the subsequent years since Betty Friedan first published The Feminine Mystique, Anne-Marie Slaughter's Why Women Still Can't Have It All illustrates some of the challenges working women in her demographic continue to face in the workplace environment, which include, and I haven't previewed my topics yet, so I just have X, Y, and Z. So I would have to go and really comment on what is the subject matter. So we're just gonna, it can be a little open-ended at this point because I haven't done all the research yet. And so let's talk then a little bit about secondary sources. I understand. I understand to those in my section, my 23rd section of English 101. So I'm talking to you, Jackson, Hoff, and Frank, right? That when we're talking about a historical primary text, we're really looking at what legal records, eyewitness accounts, right? Matters that are public. Data sets, right? Experiments, something that's tangible, it's concrete, it's quote unquote objective. But when we switch disciplines, right, and when we start talking about the humanities or we start talking about English class, the definition of what constitutes a primary text changes. So, in this sense, right, Anne-Marie Slaughter's text for all of you, right, is your primary text. She is the primary argument that I want you responding to, and I want you to show how other scholars are responding to. And you have to keep in mind, Slaughter's piece is an eyewitness account, right? She is writing from a particular historical moment that is very different from the one that Betty Friedan is writing from, right, in the 50s and 60s in response to post-World War, both world wars. And so the push of women back into the domestic sphere, Slaughter's sort of saying, okay, well, while a lot's changed, right, how much has really, and in terms of happiness and well-being in the workplace and that work-family balance. And so in the secondary sources then, which I've already decided on, right, I'm not, still not like you don't have to read every single file that's in the closed research folder. Go and pick the ones that are relevant to whatever the issue or the topic is in your thesis statement. They're pretty self-explanatory. You should be able to find something. And as we do that, right, I want you to know, um, don't don't be intimidated if the language seems like, oh my gosh, I don't know how anybody could understand it, right? If it's really full of genre specific or discourse specific technical terms, that's okay, but highlight them, right? And so here it would be useful to either upload the sources into Google Docs where you can highlight and then have a text box in the corner where you can type your notes, or print it out, use a highlighter. Don't highlight sentences. Just go through and highlight key terms, which I'm going to walk you through too as well a little bit later. But don't be put off if you're like, this doesn't make any sense, because part of being engaged in the research and engaged in discourse means that you're going to have to do a little bit of defining and a little bit of digging as to what is the author trying to say. So don't be put off if at first the language is just way too intense. Um, that being said, right, don't waste time reading something that isn't relevant, again, to your topic. And the ways that we can sort of sift through that would be to read the abstract of articles, and there are some in the closed research folder. If you don't find what you're looking for in the abstract, right, then don't read the article, because the abstract is really this condensed little academic kernel, right, of the author literally presenting, here's what my article or my essay is about. And if it's not relevant to you, then put it aside, move on to the next one. If there isn't an abstract, then what I want you to do is to like read the first page, or most of the other sources up there are introductions to books. And introductions are great, right? Because it tells you it's a preview. It's kind of like an abstract where the author lays out, right, the argument. Here's what you can expect to see in my book. And oftentimes you can find enough information in the introduction to spin your own argument or to relate it to slaughter. So those are two sort of quick tips in how to go about the research project. Now, some of them are blogs, some of them are vlogs. So in that sense, if it's a podcast, right, you're going to have to listen, you're going to have to take notes. Sort of like what you did for the TED Talk. So you should be well prepared to do that as well. So I encourage you. Some of them are pretty good. Let's make sure we do that. Okay. The other thing about not being intimidated by technical terms or genre specific language is because it's a great learning opportunity, right? We're always looking for teachable moments. And if I can just share, right, a few of mine in reading some of your papers across the semester, a few that come to mind are in the literacy narrative. I really learned a lot about Irish step dancing, right? Like, who knew that there was technical language affiliated with that? So thank you, Shannon, for giving that to me. That's kind of cool. The other ones that come into my mind are in the literacy narrative, and then as well as in the rhetorical analysis, are Hunter and Bella really taught me a lot about music, how to read music, even though I'm not literate, right, in reading music notes. But I do have a little bit of an inkling now about the history and some important names, right, affiliated with the field of music composition or with the field of reading music. And so you guys, right, are teaching me I don't know, hopefully a little bit, right? That I'm also giving back to you. So it's a reciprocal relationship. So it's nice to think of it like that as well. Okay. Um, in terms of what we should be looking for, I think we've covered that, right? So key terms, you're really looking for language that repeats, right? We're always looking for patterns. So in the happiness turn, right, we'll see some clear patterns emerging in a few different fields. And then I have a few diagrams of what this would look like in your paper. So let's turn then to um, looking at the working thesis, right? So as I said, I used Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique and Ahmed's The Happiness Turn. Now, the first approach to engaging secondary sources, right, in terms of if we just close our eyes and visualize the outline of what we want the shape of our paper to look like. So we have our introduction, right, which we've already said is that I can't make a triangle, so the upside down triangle that ends in a clear, concise thesis statement. which we worked on Tuesday, right? So you have the instant thesis formula, you have a few different templates there that you can adapt to fit your purposes. And so that's important. So once you have that working thesis, then you have to decide what context comes first. And so in the case of my working thesis, right, I've named Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique first because I think it's important that in order for readers to understand my paper, that they have an understanding of the history of working women, right? Which I mentioned briefly about after the war, right? When veterans come home, women have been working in factories for the first time in many cases, right? For many of them. And there's a push to put them back in the home. And we get the baby boom, right? As a result. And that makes sense. Men go to war, they come home, happiness, right? Well being sort of flourishes in that moment. So that makes sense. But Betty Friedan is sort of positioning something that she calls the feminine mystique, which is the problem that has no name, which means that women were not speaking to one another. They weren't talking about their frustrations to one another after they went back into the home. And so she's really concerned with issues of representation and just starting a conversation about women in the workplace and how it's kind of not fair, right? What happened after the war. And so, therefore, I would begin with the history. And then from there, right, I would move to the happiness turn because I think it's important that we define happiness, that we have an understanding of what happiness studies is, right? What does that consist of? Like, what's at stake there? And how does that relate to the new gender gap? And how does that relate to Slaughter's piece overall, right? What does happiness have to do with anything? And so from there, then I would immediately, my third source would be somebody like Sheryl Sandberg or like I forget the author's name off the top of my head, but there's a piece called The Corporate Mystique, which directly relates and engages with Slaughter by name. So those would be my three texts that I would use to set up my argument, right? And so what I want to show you is then, um, right? I think we've seen this on the board a few times, right? So I have our introduction, it funnels down into a thesis. Here's my topic of previews, 1, 2, and 3. And then from there, I'm really concerned with here's body paragraph 1, 2, and 3. That's all going to relate to the thesis. And so if you're wondering, well, where do I put my secondary sources? The answer is that it's going to come right after, right, the thesis statement. This is what I call the methodology. And the methodology is really just you sort of showing off that one, you know what you're talking about, you're smart, right? You can enter into an academic conversation. So this is where you sort of get to show off. Here's what other people say before you get to go into your own argument. And so use this shape, right? I think we can all see it. Okay, so introduction, thesis, preview of topics, right? Makes sense. We've talked about how I want this explicated. It should unfold in the order that you promise, right? In the thesis statement. But up here is where we're going to be concerned today, really laying out the secondary sources. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, glad you should ask. So here's my second, and I'm going to put all this up on Sakai as well after the video. And so here you can see what I've done is I've expanded, right? So if it was just one bubble there, now I've put them out so that you can see, right, what it looks like. So again, I have my intro, my thesis, and then I have my secondary source number 1, which I've already told you, right, is historical because it's engaged in the history of women in the workplace or their absence from the workplace and why that's a problem. And so here I've got Betty Friedan, right? It's historical context. And I've sort of laid out what you can't see because I like to use pencil, so I'll read it to you. So historical context, the feminine mystique, right? Betty Friedan. And so the topics then that unfold within that paragraph are working women post World War II and the status of women at the time Friedan was writing from. And I believe Slaughter mentions Friedan by name as well, so that's good. This is also the source where you might be able to find something about a Mrs. degree in college. You'll find a few articles on Sakai about that if that was something you were interested in chasing as well. Okay, so then here's my topics that I'm going to talk about again, right? History, status of women. And then down here, it just says transition to happiness studies. So the last sentence, right, of this paragraph is going to move towards engaging a conversation on happiness. Okay. And so for secondary source two, then you can see um, this is Ahmed, right? This is cultural, right? In fact, the happiness turn even says my methodology is cultural analysis. So that's kind of important as well. And I just named, right? Give you the title and the author. And so here, I'm really looking to, again, define happiness studies and to relate it to the thesis. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Okay. And so then your third secondary source, right? And I just have socio here because this is where it's really engaged in the social fabric of today, right? Richard Dormant responds to Slaughter. There's a few, right, that respond to her. So you pick whichever one you want there. This is beginning to transition, right, into your own argument. So once you sort of lay out this, and dude, this could even be your counter argument, right? That's totally cool as well. So here I just have that you're going to transition. The second pink area, right, is you're going to transition into what other scholars have said about Slaughter's piece and why it probably supports your argument, or maybe it doesn't. That's cool too. Whatever. And then again, you can see down here, really just the topics, right? Your preview of topics. So can we, oh, no, not that one. That's getting ahead of myself. So here, the slide before is just showing you how that's expanded. So it's going to look something like, right, here's your method, and then here's your topics. Okay, I hope you're all with me so far. Now, once you've paraphrased information, which we'll get to in a second, I want you to consider then, well, how do we weave this together with our preview? The point of doing a methodology, right? Those paragraphs that are really engaged with your source material is because you don't want to have to sort of set up what somebody else has said in the middle of one of your own body paragraphs, right? That relates to your thesis. You don't want to have to do that. What you want to do is to be able to pull threads through, right? You're just sort of like braiding things together, pulling it down. So rather than have to say, right, in the happiness turn written by Sarah Hamed, she notes, blah, 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 you can just reference it, right? You can say something like, this harkens back to this idea, right, in your own body paragraph. So I also have a diagram that explains what that would look like. And so bear with me here. Okay, so here, right, we can see our intro. You can see the thesis. We have the preview. Okay, and then I didn't circle those, so let me do that so not everybody is like, what's happening? Okay, so then here is our expanded, here's our method, right? 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph, 3. This is all about telling me what you researched. What did you learn, right? Putting that in these paragraphs here. Okay, but then do you see what happens next? So now, not only are you reaching back to the thesis to pull topics down, but you're also reaching up into the method and pulling some sort of information into the paragraph, right? Some sort of secondary, you're supporting your argument. Now, in They Say, I Say, right, you have 3 ways that you can do this, okay? And so here we're going to get a little bit specific. Up here, we're paraphrasing or we're summarizing what we researched. Down here in the body paragraphs, not so much, right? Here's where I need you to respond to whatever you've laid out here. In response to, so we have 2 responses. So the first being our claim about Slaughter's argument. So we're positioning, what do we have to say? What's the I say here about Slaughter? But then you want to say something like, probably to support yourself, right? Reach up for something here. Use the they say, bring it down, respond. You can agree, disagree, or say, yeah, no, but I think maybe she left something out, or I think she spent a little bit too much. I'm reading it differently, right? I'm talking to you, Jackson, about quantifying, right? How do we measure happiness? How could we even begin to do that? That's cool. I encourage, right, sort of that rebuttal or that if you want to refute that evidence, that's fine, but you have to do so, right, in a way that speaks to the academic conversation. And so I haven't sort of highlighted what's here. So I'll just read it to you. So again, we have our introduction, our thesis, and this is our preview, right? But before we get into that, we have to lay out what we've researched. So secondary source 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so now we're ready to get into our body paragraph. So here's 1, again, reaching up to the thesis, reaching up to secondary source number 1. Okay, and so here you're just doing, right, sort of the paragraphs thing that we've been talking about all semester. Topic sentence, right, which is your claim. Then you want to give evidence or an example from slaughter that supports your claim. And then you want to give, right, some sort of interpretation that reaches up and says, hey, I'm not crazy because, I don't know, maybe Betty Friedan is saying something similar. And here's why. See, one voice, right, isn't really a pattern. One voice is just an event. Like, who really cares if you're the only person saying this? It sounds much better. And in fact, this is how scholarship works, right? To say, hey, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Look here. And so there you would reach up into whatever your source information is. So topic, sentence, evidence, interpretation, right? And within that interpretation, you want to bring somebody else's voice into it as well. You can think of this paragraph a little bit as the in-class essay that we did, where I asked you to, that last paragraph before the conclusion, to give me your I say in terms of what your peer, right, your same-minded peer would also agree with. Same exact concept here, only now we're applying it to a little bit of a larger scale. So you can think of it that way as well. Okay. So, right, so the first approach in the method is those 3 paragraphs, which are summaries and paraphrases, right? You don't really need to include any direct quotes in there. If you don't want to, you can if you want to, but it's better to save the direct quotes for the body paragraphs, right, within your argument. So again, right, this is our method, 1, 2, 3. I know this is redundant, but I'm just trying to get it into your brains. Okay, so then we're bringing in direct quotes in body paragraphs. And the purpose of the method pieces as well is for you to set the context, right? Because you have to have socio-historical context, so social, historical, and cultural. And it doesn't really matter what order you put those in as long as they're all being addressed, because they should all sort of funnel down into the chaotic moment that Slaughter is engaged with. Okay. I think we've covered that. Oh, let's talk about how do we paraphrase, right? Let me just tell you what paraphrasing is not. Paraphrasing is not simply flipping words, right? Going into the thesaurus and saying, okay, I'm going to take this sentence that so-and-so writes, and I'm just going to flip out a few words, right? No, that's not correct. That's not good best practice. I don't want to see that ever. Okay. So, well, then how do we do it? Well, I'm happy that you should ask because I'm going to show you. Well, first of all, you can't paraphrase anything until you read the material, right? And although I've been sort of telling you the importance of marking up, right, whatever the source material is, I haven't really showed you what that might look like. And so what I've done is printed out the first 2 pages of the happiness turn. I'm sorry, this is shaking my tables a little bit. Okay, so I printed out the first 2 pages of the happiness turn. And I've taken some notes, and you'll notice that I do the same thing here that I did to your rhetorical analysis papers for those of you who have edited them or revised them. You'll notice that I've taken, right, numbers and just sort of put them 1, 2, and so forth and so on, because this helps me keep track, right, of ideas that I have, so that as I take my notes, I can say, oh yeah, that was in paragraph 2. So it's a little bit more specific than just page numbers. Okay, so once we have the source in front of us, what should we be looking for? Does anyone know? Hopefully we kind of have an idea here. So the first thing you want to look for is technical language and patterns. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and to go into Sakai, resource folder, the resources. Okay, then you're going to click on text and context. And then you're going to see the closed research folder. You're going to click on that. You're going to pull up the happiness turn. Print it out if you can, upload it to Google Docs if you can. That way you can follow along here and we can pull this apart together as a class. So go ahead and pause the video. Remember, go into Sakai, go into resources, text and context, closed research. It's a folder, you'll see it. Find the happiness turn by Sarah Ahmed, upload it to Google Docs, or print it out because we're going to read the first 2 pages. Just 2 pages. All right, so go ahead and pause and do that right now. Okay, I hope everybody's good to go. All right, so we're dealing with the happiness turn, the first 2 pages. And I think I've showed this to you, but I'm going to show it to you again. What you should be looking for is language that sticks out. What seems like it would be important here, and also patterns. And so the first thing that I've noticed, right, is that we have a lot of language here that alludes to an economy, right? So this is really engaged in economics. In fact, it's going to say, right, that happiness is something that can be quantified by virtue of, right, an economic framework, specifically a capitalist economic framework. And that's problematic, I think. So let me just show you what I've done. You can see down here at the bottom, I've laid out the terms. So I've got things like what? Industry, object, capital, value, media, produced, consumed. These terms are all terms, right, that I would affiliate with some sort of industry or economy, in this case, right, of the buying and selling of happiness. Also, what also sticks out to me, and you'll notice I put it in, it's like the paragraph here, right? Like, oh, this is a damn rhetorical analysis. How do we know that? Because she's using the word appeal, right? The appeal of happiness. And if we had to categorize happiness as one of the appeals, so ethos, pathos, or logos, right? Which one do you think we label it as? Right, we'd label it as pathos, right? An emotional appeal. And that's cool. And so I've also taken some notes in the margins that say things like this in regards to the second paragraph, right? She says here, rather than begin with the question, what is happiness? A cultural studies approach asks, what does happiness do? To what do we appeal to when we appeal to happiness? It is certainly the case that happiness is appealing. Happiness is consistently described as the object of human desire, as being what we aim for, as what gives meaning and order to human life. And then she quotes a scholar, right? This guy, Bruno Frey, who actually says that there's an economics to happiness. FYI, there's also a political economy to the gaze, what we call the gaze in film studies or in genre studies, right? So basically, like who gets to do the looking is the active subject, right? And who is being looked at is the object, right? Is sort of the what we call in film the object of desire. And you can guess, right, who is in possession of which of those. So usually men are the bearer of the look, and then women connote something called to be looked atness, right? They are the object, they are the sexualized object. So for him to be using language like this by saying that happiness, right, there's an economy to happiness, automatically suggests to me that there's politics involved here, right? So I like where he's going with this metaphor or this analogy, right? And we know that analogy is a strategy of logos at this point as well. And so my note in the margin then is, so just as gender is a type of doing femininity and masculinity, right? Happiness could also be performative, or it could be used as a verb, right? And so I just made that little mark in the margins, just that little note as I come to paraphrase. I also do things like in over here, right? I've said something like she's qualifying the argument. If we go back to my diagrams, right, especially this one, we're going to see that Sarah Ahmed's article follows this construction. She's telling us her method, right? Here she's going to be taking cultural studies. She's going to be taking things like economics, right? She's going to be quoting other scholars, and she's going to show us, right, then how happiness relates. She's going to use them to build her argument. And so this format that I've given you guys here, this can be used when you approach a source, look at it like this. This matters. This is important. This will be very helpful for you as you research. So um, if we go to the second page, right, she makes an interesting claim by pointing out that research shows that people in Bangladesh are actually happier than those in the United States. And that's kind of important here because to me, that what that suggests is that money can't buy happiness per se in all meanings. And she goes to make a point to link happiness to well-being, which I think is very important as well. And then uh, paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 are sort of evidence for her claim, right? And I see her claim kind of happening in what I'm calling paragraph 5 here, which if you pull out your handout about the 4 types of paragraphs that we've looked at this semester, this is a progressive paragraph, right? And her interpretation here of the evidence is the presumption here is that the happier you are, the better you are doing, whether the you is an individual or collective actor, right? And so here, happiness isn't really something that you can buy and sell. It's in terms of well being, because how in the world could people in Bangladesh be happier than those in the United States, right? We have an assumption that this is the land of the free, that this is this place and this country is great and wonderful in many respects, right? However, uh, it still says that maybe other countries, maybe other people measure happiness differently. And so this just brings us to paraphrasing then, right? And I've broken this down. I've taken my PowerPoint slides and um, you know how I love my two-step processes. So here's step one, right? And look, you can do paraphrasing in one of 2 ways. You could find the paragraph within the source material that speaks the most to you, or right, you can paraphrase just a passage or paragraph, or once you've done enough reading and you think you have enough information, go ahead and make a summary and paraphrase the source. Okay. And so that's what I've done here. So whichever way you want to approach it, that's fine. So step one, then, right? You have to translate the passage, the source material, into your own words. This is really important because this tells me that you understand what you've read. It's not going to work if you're just flipping words around because then I'm going to say, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? By the time we get into your body paragraphs, you have to show me that you know what you've read, that you've taken it to heart, and you understand. So the first step, right, is to translate something into your own words. All right. I've done this. Okay. So um, let me just read to you then. So I've chosen to summarize these first 2 pages. Here's the paraphrase that I get, right, by looking at individual paragraphs. Rather than ask what causes happiness, a cultural analysis of happiness seeks to understand what the consequence of happiness are or is, should say. While scholars in happiness studies acknowledge the debate over whether happiness is a commodity that can be bought and sold, produced and consumed, and turned into an industry, they also acknowledge that there are gaps in this mode of thinking, as countries in the global south report higher instances of happy as those in the global north. As a discipline, happiness studies is interdisciplinary and it turns on science, history, and philosophy. In order to understand the happiness turn, a both and framework is necessary to hold happiness in productive tension as both a science and a philosophy. Thus, happiness studies aims to reconnect the mind to the body and understand how both shape any given society's perception of their individual's well-being. Okay, so you can see, right, that this is my summary, right? This is my paraphrase. But that's just translating it into my own language. We still have to do a little bit of work here, which brings us to step 2. Okay? So once you've translated the passage or the article, right, into your own words, then you're going to flip the sentence, right? And you're going to be, what does it say? Be sure to lead with the writer's key ideas and main points. Okay? All right. So here's how we do that. You'll notice what I've done is I've literally flipped what I've paraphrased on its head. I started with the bottom and ended with what was on top. And Matthew, this should be very easy for you because as a journalist, right, or as a reporter, you're sort of asked to lead with the most important ideas, or rather than right in academic writing, most of the time we delay what's most important for the end or for the bottom of a paragraph, right? We have a topic, sort of a broad topic sentence, and then we funnel it down into the specific. But here, in a paraphrase, you're supposed to lead with the most important idea. So when I flip it, here's what I come up with. And this leads with key ideas, key terms, right? And sort of the patterns that I found. So happiness studies aims to shape, aims, let me start over, getting ahead of myself. Who would have believed it? Happiness studies aims to understand the mind-body connection as a means to explore how both faculties shape different societies' perceptions of well-being. In order to understand what Sarah Ahmed calls the happiness turn, a both and framework is necessary to hold happiness in productive tension as both a philosophy and a science. While scholars in happiness study acknowledge the debate over whether happiness is a commodity that can be bought and sold, produced and consumed, or turned into an industry, they also acknowledge that there are gaps in this mode of thinking, as countries in the global south report higher instances of happiness than those in the global north. Thus, rather than ask what causes happiness, a cultural analysis of happiness seeks to understand what the consequences of being happy are. See how I just done that? So I take my initial passage that I translated right into my own words and I flip it and I put the most important information first, which would be right defining what happiness studies are or what it is, and then moving into the sort of the specifics to then make a claim, right? That we shouldn't be looking at what causes happiness. We should sort of look at what makes happiness a state of being or a sort of performance, right? Like, what are people doing to be happy? Now, if I were writing this paper, the next thing that I would have to do, right, is then say, okay, well, now that I sort of have a working understanding of what happiness studies is, right, and how it works, and where Ahmed is coming from, then I would need to say, okay, I need to relate this to slaughter. How does this idea, right, intersect? Or how could I enter it into the conversation? And my answer to that again would be when she talks about the new gender gap, right? She is speaking about scholarship that's already been done, research, and that research uh, turned up this article called The Happiness Turn. So you can see how things are so interrelated. You need to keep that, right? It's a web, what I call the web of contingencies. So everything is related here. So from Slaughter and The New Gender Gap by Stevenson and Wolfer to Sarah Ahmed's Happiness Study. So now it's up to me as the writer to put them in dialogue with one another, which I would do in the body paragraphs of my essay. So that's how that works. Okay, so then once we have this paraphrase, right? So then what do we do with it? And it should be a summary. So you can look, I have these written down here. Here we go. You can look at the Little Seagull in the Little Seagull Handbook on page 74 and 75. It gives you sort of the outline of how to do a working, right, annotated bibliography. For this assignment, I need you to do 3 sources, okay? And so you need to do 3. So 3 summaries that are as robust, right, as the one that I've provided you, right? So from my research question to my working thesis to, right, to the summary of the paraphrase. So I have an idea of what I was interested in, and I'd have to chase it. All right. So once you do that, right, you have to give me the works cited, which will be really beneficial. Let's just do it now so that when it comes time, you can just copy and paste it, right? And so I want you to create a works cited. Again, you can go to the Little Seagull Handbook. Here's a quick and dirty tip, right? It's like if you wanted to sort of cheat, this is how you would do it. So page 134 in Little Seagull, gives you basically like whatever. If you have a scholarly article, if you have a podcast, if you have a book, it'll tell you how to format it, how to format the works cited entry. And if you're still not sure, or maybe if you're not even sure what a paragraph looks like, go to the sample research paper, right? In the MLA research paper in Little Seagull. It's a great way to cheat. It's a great way to say, okay, what does this look like in practice? And I will have to upload one of the articles that was recently published, in which I do the exact same framework, right, that I've given you. This is how writers spin an argument. This is how you write scholarly. And so I'm going to, at this point, pause the video because you've watched this much, which is important. But I'm going to sort of go get my Easter egg because once this is finished, I need you to send me an email and you have to give me the name of the person you see in the frame. Okay, and so that's how I'm going to know that you watched from sort of start to finish before I show you what the annotated bibliography ought to look like. Okay, so sit tight. I'll be right back. Okay, everybody, this is my stinky puppy. This is Hazel Grace. Okay, and she's the Easter egg. So you need to be able to tell me what my dog's name is and how I got her name. So her name's Hazel Grace. Hey, hi, Hazel. And we named her for Hazel Grace, right? In The Fault in Our Stars, John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, because it was my favorite book at the time that we got her 4 years ago. So she is the Easter egg, Hazel Grace. So you have to write that in the email that I'm going to ask you to send me at the end of the video. Hazel Grace, and her name comes from John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. So again, this is the proof that I'm going to know that you watched this video. Okay, but back to business here. And so for the annotated bibliography, then, once you translate the passage into your own words and then you flip it, right? So we're taking the most important leading with the most important information. You're going to go ahead and stick your works cited up at the top of the page, right? Like this. Okay, and then copy and paste your summary. And you should have 3 of these, and they should be the sources that you intend to use in your essay. All right, and it's cool. Just do that, right? 3 on a page. Submit it to Sakai for class. I don't know why I put on the revised course schedule that it was due on the 29th, because it's not. It's due on the 27th. I need this done, or before. So after we're done here, I'll go and make that assignment box. And you can go and just upload your summary there. You will also, once you email me, right, the Easter egg and that information, you will email me that you finished, and I will in turn email you, right, the copy of my notes so you can see what my annotations look like and to use it as a guide. I will send you the diagrams, right, so you can see the structure of what the paper should look like, as well as the instructions to paraphrase and sort of the summary, right, of my own paraphrase. So you will have all that at your disposal. Keep in mind, right, that when we come back, when we meet on class on Tuesday, that I should have your annotated bibliography as well as, right, an introduction to the essay, because we're going to be moving like wildfire from this point forward. No pun intended with what's happening out in California at this very moment. And so this is all due, right, again, by Tuesday, November 27th. I think my dates are correct. Okay. Even though, right, the course schedule says 29th, I'm confused. Working at 2 schools does this to you. So I hope that everybody has a very, very happy holiday break. I want you to stay safe, stay smart, and keep in touch. And thank you, Jordan, for sending me the picture of what Shepherd looks like. My kids just thought that was fabulous. But let me know if you have any questions or you run into any trouble. It's much easier to nip things in the butt if you bring them to me beforehand rather than, right, say the day the paper's due. And so make sure you have a working thesis, right? That should have been already submitted, as well as question 2. And then moving forward, right, I need your annotated bib and your introduction by Tuesday when we meet again on the 27th. And don't worry about the counter argument. If you can't weave it into the introduction, that's where we'll sort of start when we meet again. So I hope you guys have a good holiday, and please say hello to family for me. All right, I'll see you Tuesday on the 27th. Bye.